The transport shuttle hummed quietly as it approached the Galactic Combat Academy station, orbiting Kepler 442b. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the viewport, watching the massive structure grow larger. At 16 years old, he was the youngest human ever accepted into the Academy's prestigious martial arts program. The scholarship letter still felt unreal in his pocket. "First time seeing the Academy?" asked Captain Vex, the Altarian pilot. His blue skin gleamed under the shuttle's lights, and his forearms moved expertly across the control panel. "Yeah," Jake replied, trying to hide his nervousness. "It's bigger than I expected." Captain Vex chuckled, a sound like wind chimes. "Wait until you see the training halls. They're designed to accommodate every species in the galaxy. Some of the gravity chambers can crush a human flat." Jake swallowed hard. He had trained in martial arts since he was 5, earning his black belt in 3 different Earth disciplines. But Earth martial arts were considered primitive compared to galactic standards. Most species had been perfecting combat techniques for thousands of years while humans were still figuring out fire. The shuttle docked with a soft thud. Jake grabbed his single bag and followed Captain Vex through the airlock. The station's corridors were enormous, built to accommodate species ranging from the tiny Pixari to the massive Gorlax. Jake felt very small as he walked past groups of alien students. "Human?" someone whispered behind him. Jake turned to see a group of Zephyrian students pointing at him. Their tall, slender forms moved with natural grace, and their silver skin seemed to shimmer with each movement. One of them laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is that the primitive they let in?" the tallest Zephyrian asked loudly. "I heard humans still fight with their fists." Jake kept walking, his face burning with embarrassment. Captain Vex gave him a sympathetic look but said nothing. They had warned him about this during orientation. Humans were newcomers to galactic society, and many species still saw them as backward. The registration hall buzzed with activity. Hundreds of students from dozens of species filled out forms and received their room assignments. Jake joined the line behind a group of Kralik students. Their rock-like skin and massive builds made them look like living boulders. "You lost, little human?" one of them rumbled, looking down at Jake. "The nursery is on level 12. The other Kraliks laughed, their voices echoing like falling stones. Jake clenched his fist but forced himself to stay calm. Getting into a fight on his first day would probably get him expelled. "I'm here for the martial arts program," Jake said quietly. The lead Kralik snorted. "Martial arts? What can a soft skin like you possibly know about fighting? Your species has been spacefaring for what, 50 years? My people have been perfecting combat for 50,000. A crowd was gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Jake spotted several species he recognized from his study materials. The elegant Silari with their plant-like features. The mechanical Nexus with their cybernetic enhancements. The fierce Ravani with their predator instincts. "Leave him alone, Granite," a new voice said. Jake turned to see a young Ravani approaching. Her cat-like features and golden fur marked her as nobility among her people. He passed the entrance exams just like everyone else. Granite, the lead Kralix, laughed again. "The entrance exams are different for primitives, Kira. They probably tested him on finger painting and breathing." Kira's amber eyes flashed dangerously. The Ravani were known for their quick tempers and quicker claws. "That's enough." "Actually," Jake said, finding his voice, "I took the same exams as everyone else. Same physical tests, same combat simulations, same theoretical knowledge requirements." The crowd murmured with surprise. Even Kira looked impressed. The galactic entrance exams were notoriously difficult, designed to test students from species with vastly different physical capabilities. "Impossible," Granite said, but his voice carried less certainty now. "No human could pass the Veltar combat simulation. That test has a 90% failure rate for experienced warriors." Jake reached into his bag and pulled out his acceptance letter. The holographic seal of the Galactic Combat Academy floated above the document along with his test scores. The crowd leaned in to look. Perfect score on theoretical knowledge, and someone read aloud, 95% on physical adaptation tests, 98% on the Veltar simulation. The corridor fell silent. Even the background hum of the station's system seemed to quiet. A 98% score on the Veltar simulation was almost unheard of. The test was designed by the galaxy's greatest military minds to push students beyond their limits. Granite stared at the scores, his rocky features shifting with confusion and disbelief. "This has to be a mistake, some kind of computer error." Computer errors don't create holographic Academy seals, Kira pointed out. Her tail swished with amusement. Looks like the primitive might surprise us all. An announcement echoed through the hall in the Universal Translation Matrix. All first-year students report to Orientation Hall 7 for Academy introduction and class assignments. The crowd began to disperse, but Jake could feel eyes still watching him. Conversations followed him in a dozen different languages, most of which his universal translator couldn't quite catch. He heard human and primitive repeated many times. Kira fell into step beside him as they walked toward the orientation hall. "Don't let them get to you," she said quietly. "Every species here thinks they're the greatest warriors in the galaxy. It's part of the culture." "Thanks," Jake replied. "I'm Jake Morrison, by the way." "Kira Velthara of the Golden Pride," she said formally, then grinned, showing sharp canine teeth. "But just Kira works fine. So how did a human really score that high on the Veltar? That simulation is supposed to be impossible for your species." Jake shrugged. "I've been training since I was little. Earth martial arts might seem primitive, but they teach you to adapt, to use whatever advantages you have instead of relying on natural gifts." They entered the orientation hall, a massive amphitheater with seats arranged in complex patterns to accommodate different species' needs. Jake found himself assigned to Section C, mixed species seating. Granite and his Kralix friends were several rows away, still shooting glances in his direction. The Academy's headmaster took the stage, a dignified centauri with flowing robes and an aura of ancient wisdom. "Welcome, students, to the Galactic Combat Academy. You represent the finest warriors from across known space. Over the next 4 years, you will learn not just to fight but to understand the deeper principles of combat, honor, and protection." Jake listened carefully, taking notes on his tablet. Around him, other students seemed more interested in sizing each other up than paying attention to the speech. The headmaster's words about honor and protection resonated with him. That's why he had come here, not just to prove humans could fight, but to learn how to protect others. "Your first classes begin tomorrow morning," the headmaster continued. "You will be sorted into mixed species groups to foster cooperation and understanding. Remember, you are no longer just representatives of your individual species. You are future guardians of galactic peace." As the orientation ended and students began filing out, Jake felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Tomorrow would be his real test. Jake woke before dawn, his internal clock still adjusting to the station's artificial day cycle. His dormitory room was small but functional, with environmental controls that could simulate Earth's atmosphere and gravity. He had kept both set to standard galactic settings, wanting to adapt as quickly as possible. After a quick breakfast of synthesized nutrients that tasted vaguely like scrambled eggs, Jake made his way to Combat Hall 3. The hallway buzzed with nervous energy as first-year students gathered outside the massive doors. Most stood in groups divided by species, creating obvious barriers between different alien cultures. "Look who showed up," Granite rumbled as Jake approached. The massive Kralix was surrounded by his usual group of followers. "Ready for some real training, soft skin? This isn't whatever primitive dancing you call martial arts on your little planet." Jake ignored the taunt and checked his class assignment tablet. Mixed Species Combat Fundamentals with Master Thorn. The name was familiar from his research. Master Thorn was a legendary Nexus warrior who had served in the Galactic Defense Corps for over 300 years. The combat hall doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a space so vast Jake couldn't see the far wall. Multiple training areas were arranged throughout the hall, each designed for different types of combat and environmental conditions. Some areas had variable gravity, others had different atmospheric compositions. Training dummies and holographic opponents flickered in and out of existence across various platforms. "Impressive, isn't it?" Kira appeared beside him, her golden fur gleaming under the hall's bright lights. "My older brother trained here 5 years ago. He said the advanced classes use real weapons and full-contact sparring. About 50 students had been assigned to Master Thorn's class, representing nearly 20 different species. Jake recognized most of them from his galactic anatomy studies. The insectoid hivers with their compound eyes and chitinous armor, the ethereal luminari whose bodies seemed to be made of controlled energy, the aquatic depths who wore environmental suits filled with their homeworld's water. Master Thorn emerged from a side chamber, and Jake understood immediately why the Nexus were respected throughout the galaxy. The Master's body was a perfect fusion of organic and mechanical components. His left arm had been replaced with advanced cybernetics that hummed with contained power. His right eye glowed with digital readouts and targeting systems. Despite his modifications, he moved with fluid grace that suggested incredible skill. "Welcome to Combat Fundamentals," Master Thorn said, his voice carrying easily across the vast space. "I am Master Thorn. For the next year, I will attempt to teach you the basics of galactic combat doctrine. Some of you will excel. Many of you will struggle. A few of you will quit and transfer to less demanding programs." His mechanical eye swept across the assembled students, pausing briefly on each face. When his gaze reached Jake, the human felt as if he were being scanned and analyzed down to the molecular level. Combat in a galactic context is different from the tribal fighting most species develop naturally, Master Thorn continued. You must learn to fight opponents with completely different physical capabilities, sensory systems, and tactical advantages. A technique that works against your own species may be useless against others. He gestured toward the training areas. Today we begin with assessment. I need to understand each student's current skill level and natural capabilities. You will demonstrate your best combat techniques against holographic opponents, calibrated to your species' average physical parameters. The students spread out across different training platforms. Jake found himself assigned to Platform 7, along with Granite and two other students he didn't recognize. One was a sleek Vorthon with skin that seemed to shift colors like oil on water. The other was a heavily built Taurian whose thick hide and powerful frame made him look like a walking tank. "Humans first," Master Thorn announced as he approached their platform. "Demonstrate your species' primary combat discipline." Jake stepped into the center of the platform. A holographic opponent materialized in front of him, a generic humanoid figure about his size and build. The safety systems ensured the hologram couldn't actually hurt him, but it could apply pressure and resistance to make the combat feel real. He took a deep breath and fell into a fighting stance. His style was an amalgamation of everything he had learned over 11 years of training. Karate for powerful strikes, jiu-jitsu for grappling and ground fighting, boxing for hand combinations and footwork, taekwondo for high kicks and flexibility. The holographic opponent attacked with basic punches and kicks, movements designed to test fundamental defensive skills. Jake deflected the first strike and countered with a quick jab to the solar plexus, followed by a leg sweep. The opponent stumbled but recovered quickly, launching into a series of combination attacks. Jake moved smoothly between defensive and offensive techniques. He blocked a high kick with his forearm, trapped the leg, and delivered an elbow strike to the opponent's ribs. When the hologram tried to grapple, Jake shifted his weight and threw it over his shoulder with a perfect judo throw. The demonstration lasted only 90 seconds, but Jake felt like he had shown a good range of his abilities. He stepped back and bowed to the holographic opponent, a habit from his traditional training. "Interesting," Master Thorn said, making notes on his tablet. "Your techniques show influences from multiple disciplines. This is unusual. Most species develop a single dominant fighting style based on their physical advantages." Granite snorted loudly. "Looks like dancing to me. Pretty moves, but where's the power? Where's the aggression? Fighting isn't about being graceful." "Your turn." "Kralix," Master Thorn said without looking up from his tablet. Granite stomped onto the platform, his massive frame causing the floor to vibrate slightly. A new holographic opponent appeared, this one built like a Kralix with thick rocky skin and powerful limbs. Granite's fighting style was exactly what Jake expected. Pure brute force combined with his species' natural durability, he charged the opponent head-on, absorbing several strikes to his rock-hard skin without flinching. His punches were like sledgehammers, each one capable of crushing normal bone. When he connected with the hologram's torso, the impact sounded like breaking stone. But Granite was slow. His attacks were telegraphed and predictable. The holographic opponent, even programmed to Kralix standards, began to adapt and avoid his heavy strikes. Granite grew frustrated, swinging harder but connecting less often. "Enough," Master Thorn called after 2 minutes. "Mr. Rockbreaker, your power is impressive, but your technique needs significant work. Raw strength is not sufficient at advanced combat levels." The Vorthon student, who introduced himself as Zix, demonstrated a fighting style based on speed and unpredictability. His color-shifting skin served as natural camouflage, making it difficult to track his movements. He struck with lightning-fast attacks from unexpected angles, never staying in one position long enough for the opponent to counter. The Taurian, Bullro, showed incredible defensive capabilities. His thick hide and massive frame allowed him to absorb tremendous punishment while wearing down opponents with methodical, precise attacks. His style reminded Jake of a heavyweight boxer who focused on endurance over flashy combinations. Each of your species has developed combat techniques that maximize your natural advantages, Master Thorn observed as they finished the demonstrations. This is both a strength and a weakness. Against opponents from your own species, these techniques are highly effective. Against other species, they may fail completely. He activated a holographic display showing combat statistics from their demonstrations. Mr. Morrison's techniques show the most adaptability. While individually less powerful than specialized techniques, they offer solutions to a wide variety of combat scenarios. Granite scowled at this assessment. Adaptability doesn't matter if you can't hurt your opponent. One solid hit from me would end any fight with a human. Would it? Master Thorn asked. Let's test that theory. Mr. Morrison, would you be willing to demonstrate against Mr. Rockbreaker? Full contact sparring with safety protocols enabled. The other students gathered around their platform as word spread quickly through the hall. A human facing off against a Kralix was unusual enough to draw attention from other training groups. Jake could hear whispers and see credits being exchanged as students placed bets on the outcome. This should be quick, someone said loudly. Humans break easy. Jake stepped onto the sparring platform, his heart racing. Granite was twice his weight and probably 3 times as strong. The Kralix's rocky skin could shrug off most of Jake's attacks, while a single solid hit from Granite could end the fight immediately. But as Jake settled into his fighting stance, he remembered something his first sensei had taught him years ago. Size and strength are advantages, the old man had said. But they're not everything. Intelligence, timing, and technique can overcome raw power. Master Thorn raised his hand. Begin when ready. Fight until submission, knockout, or my call to stop. Granite charged forward like a living bulldozer, his massive fists swinging in devastating arcs. Jake had exactly 13 seconds to prove that human martial arts weren't just primitive dancing. The first 3 seconds belonged to Granite. His massive form thundered across the sparring platform like an avalanche, both fists raised to deliver crushing blows that could shatter normal bone. The watching students held their breath, expecting the fight to end before it really began. Jake didn't try to meet the charge head-on. Instead, he dropped low and moved laterally, using his superior speed and flexibility to avoid Granite's opening assault. The Kralix's first punch whistled through empty air where Jake's head had been a moment before. Granite's momentum carried him past Jake's position. As the massive alien stumbled slightly, Jake struck. But instead of attacking Granite's rock-hard torso or arms, Jake targeted something he had noticed during the demonstrations. Every species had vulnerable points, and the Kralix were no exception. Jake's elbow strike connected precisely with a nerve cluster behind Granite's knee, a spot where the rocky plating was thinner to allow joint movement. The strike didn't damage the Kralix, but it sent a shock of pain up his leg that caused his balance to shift. 4 seconds had passed. Granite spun around with surprising speed for such a large being, his anger making his attacks even more vicious. He swung a backhand that could have decapitated a smaller opponent, but Jake was already moving. The human ducked under the strike and immediately transitioned into a grappling technique his jiu-jitsu instructor had made him practice thousands of times. Jake's arms wrapped around Granite's thick leg, and he used the Kralix's own forward momentum to execute a perfect leg takedown. Granite's massive frame crashed to the platform with a sound like falling rocks. The impact would have stunned most beings, but Kralix physiology was built for punishment. 7 seconds. Granite tried to push himself up, but Jake was already in position. He had studied Kralix anatomy extensively during his academy preparation. While their rock-like skin provided incredible protection, their joints required flexibility, points that could be exploited by someone who understood leverage and pressure points. Jake applied a modified rear naked choke, but instead of trying to cut off Granite's air supply through his thick neck, he targeted the nerve clusters that controlled the Kralix's motor functions. His arm position applied precise pressure to specific points that would cause temporary paralysis without permanent damage. "What are you doing to me?" Granite growled, his voice strained as his limbs began to feel heavy and unresponsive. "Something my species learned a long time ago," Jake replied calmly, maintaining the hold. When you can't overpower your opponent, you find another way to win. 10 seconds. Granite struggled against the hold, his massive strength still formidable even with his motor control compromised. But Jake had positioned himself perfectly, using the Krelix's own body weight and bone structure to maintain the submission. Every time Granite tried to break free, the pressure on his nerve clusters increased. Master Thorn watched with fascination, his mechanical eye recording every detail of the technique. The other students stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. A human had taken down one of the strongest species in the galaxy using nothing but skill and knowledge. 12 seconds. Granite's struggles began to weaken as the nerve pressure took effect. The technique wasn't painful in the traditional sense, but it left him unable to coordinate his movements effectively. His rock-hard skin, which had always been his greatest advantage, couldn't protect him from an attack that targeted his nervous system. "I yield," Granite said quietly, his pride cracking along with his certainty about human inferiority. 13 seconds. Jake immediately released the hold and stepped back, helping Granite to his feet. The Krelix shook his massive head, testing his returning motor control with obvious confusion. "How?" Granite asked, looking at Jake with something approaching respect for the first time. "My people have never been defeated by submission techniques. Our skin is too thick, our muscles too dense." "Nerve clusters," Jake explained simply. "Every species has them, but they're in different locations. I spent months studying galactic anatomy before coming here. Your people are incredibly strong, but you still need neural pathways to control that strength." Master Thorn stepped onto the platform, his expression unreadable. "Remarkable. Mr. Morrison, where did you learn that specific nerve cluster manipulation? That technique isn't taught in any standard human martial arts discipline." "You're right," Jake admitted. "I developed it myself after studying Krelix physiology. Traditional human martial arts teach pressure points for humans. But if I was going to study here, I needed to understand how those principles might apply to other species." A murmur ran through the crowd of watching students. Several of them were frantically checking their own tablets, probably looking up human neural anatomy in case they faced Jake in future sparring sessions. "You studied other species' anatomy just to come here?" Kira asked, her amber eyes wide with surprise. "That's actually brilliant. Most of us only know how to fight our own kind." Zix, the color-shifting Vorthan, stepped forward. "Show me the pressure points for my species," he demanded, his skin cycling through nervous color patterns. "If humans know our weaknesses, we should know yours." Jake shook his head. "It doesn't work that way. The technique I used on Granite required leverage and positioning that only worked because of our relative sizes and strengths. Against you, I'd need completely different approaches." "Demonstrate," Master Thorn ordered. "Mr. Zix, if you're willing to serve as a training partner." The Vorthan nodded eagerly, probably wanting to prove that his speed and camouflage abilities would make him impossible for a human to catch. He took a fighting stance on the platform, his skin already beginning to shift colors to match the background. Jake studied his opponent carefully. Vorthans were fast and relied heavily on visual confusion to disorient enemies. Their bone structure was lighter than humans, built for speed rather than power. But speed could be turned into a disadvantage if channeled incorrectly. "Begin," Master Thorn called. Zix immediately activated his camouflage fully, becoming nearly invisible against the platform's surface. Only his movement gave away his position as he darted around Jake in unpredictable patterns, looking for an opening to attack. But Jake didn't try to track Zix visually. Instead, he closed his eyes and focused on sound and air movement. His Aikido training had taught him to sense opponents through more than just sight. He could feel the slight vibrations in the platform. As Zix moved, hear the whisper of displaced air as the Vorthan darted past. When Zix finally attacked, coming in fast with a strike aimed at Jake's ribs, the human was ready. Jake pivoted smoothly and caught Zix's wrist as it extended, using the Vorthan's own speed against him. A simple hip toss sent Zix flying across the platform to land hard on his back. The technique had taken less than 5 seconds. "Speed without control is just chaos," Jake said, offering Zix a hand up. "Aikido teaches us to redirect an opponent's energy rather than meeting it head-on." Zix accepted the help, his camouflage flickering as his concentration broke. "Your species fights like water," he said with grudging admiration. "Always flowing, always adapting." Master Thorn made more notes on his tablet, his mechanical eye whirring as it analyzed the combat data. "Class, observe what just happened here." Mr. Morrison didn't try to match his opponent's natural advantages. Instead, he identified their weaknesses and adapted his techniques accordingly. This is the essence of advanced combat theory. The Taurian, Bullro, stepped forward next. "What about defensive opponents?" he challenged. "My people specialize in absorbing damage and wearing down attackers. Your tricks won't work if you can't hurt me." Jake considered this. Bullro was right that traditional striking techniques would be largely ineffective against Taurian hide, but every defensive strategy had counters if you understood the underlying principles. "You're thinking like most fighters," Jake said, "attacking the body, trying to cause damage through impact. But what if the goal isn't to hurt you?" He gestured for Bullro to attack. The massive Taurian charged forward with methodical precision, exactly as Jake had expected. But instead of trying to avoid or block the attack, Jake did something unexpected. He moved directly toward Bullro, closing the distance and eliminating the Taurian's ability to build momentum. Jake's hands found specific points on Bullro's thick arms, applying pressure to motor control nerves while simultaneously disrupting the Taurian's balance. Within moments, the massive alien found himself on the ground, despite suffering no actual damage. "Submission doesn't always mean pain," Jake explained as he helped Bullro to his feet. "Sometimes it just means control." The combat hall had grown quiet except for the sound of students frantically taking notes. Word was spreading to other training platforms, and Jake could see instructors from other classes observing from the edges of their group. News of the sparring demonstrations spread through the academy faster than a quantum transmission. By evening, Jake found himself the subject of intense scrutiny from students and faculty alike. The cafeteria buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages, most of them focused on the human who had defeated 3 different species using techniques no one had seen before. Jake sat alone at a corner table, trying to eat his dinner in peace. The synthesized protein tasted like chicken, but the texture was off in a way that reminded him he was very far from home. He had hoped to keep a low profile during his first semester, but that plan had clearly failed. "Mind if we join you?" Kira appeared beside his table, her golden fur catching the cafeteria's warm lighting. Behind her stood Zix, Bullro, and even Granite, all looking somewhat sheepish. "Sure," Jake said, gesturing to the empty chairs, "though I'm surprised you want to be seen with the primitive human." Granite's rocky features shifted in what might have been embarrassment. "About that," he rumbled, "I owe you an apology. My people value strength above all else, and I assumed humans were weak because you're smaller than us. Today you proved that strength comes in many forms." "No hard feelings," Jake replied. "Your charge was impressive. If you had connected with either of those first punches, the fight would have been over. But you didn't let me connect," Granite pointed out. "That's what I don't understand. How did you know exactly where to move? How did you find my weak spot so quickly?" Jake set down his eating utensil and considered how to explain. "On Earth we have a saying, knowledge is power. My species isn't the strongest or the fastest in the galaxy. We're not the most durable or the best adapted to extreme environments, but we're very good at learning and adapting." He activated his tablet and showed them a complex anatomical diagram. "I've spent the last 2 years studying every species that attends this academy. Bone structure, muscle groups, nerve clusters, joint mechanics, sensory systems. I know where you're vulnerable because I made it my business to know." Six's skin shifted to deep blue patterns that indicated amazement among his people. "You memorized the anatomy of hundreds of species just to come here?" "Not just memorized," Jake corrected. "I analyzed how different fighting techniques might work against each species. What human martial arts principles could be adapted for opponents with different physiologies. It's not enough to know where someone is vulnerable. You need to know how to exploit that vulnerability effectively." Bullro leaned forward, his massive frame making the chair creak. "But why? Most species rely on their natural advantages. Kralix use strength, Vorthans use speed. My people use endurance. Why not just focus on whatever humans do best?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something that seemed obvious to him but was apparently revolutionary to his classmates. "Because natural advantages only work against opponents who are similar to you. In galactic combat, You'll face enemies with completely different capabilities. If you only know how to fight your own kind, you'll lose against anyone else. Is that why humans progress so quickly? Kira asked. Your species went from primitive to spacefaring in just a few thousand years. Most species take 10 times longer. Maybe, Jake said. Humans have always been adaptable. When we couldn't run as fast as predators, we learned to use tools. When we couldn't survive in harsh environments, we built shelters. When we couldn't defeat stronger enemies, we developed better tactics. It's not that we're better than other species. We just approach problems differently. A shadow fell across their table and Jake looked up to see Master Thorn approaching. The cyborg instructor's mechanical components hummed quietly as he walked, and his artificial eye was focused intently on Jake. Mr. Morrison, Master Thorn said formally, the Academy Council has requested a meeting with you tomorrow morning. Your performance today has raised some questions. Jake's stomach dropped. Am I in trouble? Quite the opposite, Master Thorn replied. Your techniques have impressed several senior instructors. They want to understand how you developed your approaches and whether they can be incorporated into the standard curriculum. Granite whistled, a sound like wind through a rock formation. The Academy Council wants to learn from a first-year student? That's unprecedented, Master Thorn nodded. Mr. Morrison's demonstrations suggest that human martial arts philosophy may have applications we haven't considered. The ability to adapt techniques across species barriers could revolutionize galactic combat doctrine. After Master Thorn left, Jake's dinner companions peppered him with questions about human fighting techniques. He tried to explain concepts like leverage, timing, and using an opponent's strength against them, but it was clear that these ideas were foreign to most galactic thinking about combat. Show me how you analyze my weaknesses, Zix demanded, his skin cycling through curious purple patterns. I want to understand your process. Jake pulled up Forthan Anatomy on his tablet. Your species evolved for speed and stealth, light bone structure, efficient muscle groups, advanced camouflage capabilities. But speed requires momentum, and momentum can be redirected. Your camouflage works by visual confusion, so it fails against opponents who don't rely primarily on sight. He traced patterns on the anatomical diagram. Your joints are designed for rapid direction changes, which makes them more flexible but less stable than other species. If I can disrupt your balance at the moment when you're changing direction, your speed becomes a disadvantage. It's like you reverse-engineered our entire species for combat purposes, Bullrow marveled. Do all humans think like this? Not exactly, Jake admitted. But human martial arts have always emphasized understanding your opponent. Ancient Earth warriors studied enemy fighting styles and developed counters. Sun Tzu wrote about knowing your enemy as well as yourself. It's part of our cultural approach to conflict. Kira's ears perked forward with interest. Sun Tzu? Was he a great human warrior? More like a philosopher and strategist, Jake explained. He wrote about winning battles through superior knowledge and planning rather than just fighting harder. One of his most famous quotes is, "The supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." The group fell silent as they considered this concept. Most galactic cultures viewed combat as a test of individual prowess, with honor going to the strongest or most skilled warrior. The idea of avoiding direct confrontation was almost alien to their thinking. That's what you did today, Granite said slowly. You didn't try to overpower us. You found ways to win without actually fighting us at our strengths. Exactly, Jake said. In human martial arts, the best victory is the one where nobody gets seriously hurt, but the conflict is resolved. We developed techniques that could stop opponents without causing permanent damage. But what about honor? Kira asked. Among my people, there's no honor in victory through trickery or avoiding direct combat. Jake considered this carefully. The concept of honor was complex and varied widely among galactic cultures. I think there's honor in protecting others effectively. If I can stop a threat without causing unnecessary harm, isn't that better than a brutal fight where everyone gets hurt? The Academy teaches that combat is about protection, Zix pointed out. We're supposed to be guardians of galactic peace, not just warriors seeking personal glory. Maybe that's why the Council wants to meet with you, Bullrow suggested. Your approach fits the Academy's mission better than traditional combat thinking. As dinner ended and the group prepared to return to their dormitories, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving at the Academy: acceptance. His classmates were no longer looking at him as a primitive curiosity. They were seeing him as a peer with valuable insights to offer. Jake, Granite said as they reached the corridor junction where their paths diverged. Would you be willing to teach me some of your techniques? I mean, if you have time. I'd like to learn too, Zix added. My speed means nothing if opponents can predict and counter my movements. Count me in as well, Kira said. The Ravani pride ourselves on being fierce warriors, but what you showed today was more effective than raw aggression. Jake looked around at the group of alien students who had gone from mocking him to asking for his help in the span of a single day. I'd be happy to share what I know, but remember, these techniques work because they're adapted to each specific opponent. What I used against Granite won't work against Zix and vice versa. That's exactly why we need to learn, Bullro rumbled. You're thinking about combat in ways we never considered. Maybe humans aren't primitive after all. Maybe you're just different. As Jake walked back to his dormitory, he reflected on the day's events. When he had received his acceptance letter to the academy, he had worried about proving that humans belonged among the galaxy's elite warriors. Now he realized he had something more valuable than just belonging. He had something to contribute. His tablet chimed with a message from the Academy Council, confirming his meeting for tomorrow morning. Jake smiled as he read the brief note. Whatever questions they wanted to ask, he was ready to answer them. Today had proven that human martial arts weren't just primitive fighting techniques. The Academy Council chamber was more intimidating than Jake had imagined. Holographic displays showed star maps and combat statistics from across the galaxy, while the curved walls seemed to stretch infinitely upward. 5 council members sat behind a crescent-shaped table, each representing a different major species in galactic society. Counselor Vexara, an ancient centauri with flowing silver robes, spoke first. Mr. Morrison, thank you for joining us. Your demonstration yesterday has generated considerable discussion among the faculty. To her left sat General Thakmor, a massive Gorlax whose battle scars told stories of countless conflicts. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. In 300 years of military service, I have never seen techniques like those you displayed. Where did you learn to fight in such ways? Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. I developed them myself, General. I studied the anatomy and combat styles of various species, then adapted human martial arts principles to work against different opponents. Adapted how, exactly? Asked Dr. Zilnash, a slight figure whose Pixari features made her look almost childlike despite her obvious intelligence. Our analysis of your techniques shows efficiency ratings, far beyond what should be possible for cross-species combat. Applications. Jake activated his tablet and projected a holographic display showing anatomical diagrams and technique breakdowns. Human martial arts are based on principles rather than just physical techniques. Leverage, timing, balance, pressure points, energy redirection. These principles can be applied differently depending on the opponent. He highlighted specific examples from his fights with Granite, Zix, and Bullro. Against the Kralik student, I used nerve cluster manipulation because their strength made direct confrontation impossible. Against the Vorthon, I relied on redirection techniques because matching his speed was equally impossible. Each technique was adapted to exploit specific vulnerabilities while working within my own limitations. Fascinating, murmured Professor Kelthus, a Nexus academic whose cybernetic enhancements whirred softly as they processed the information. Your approach treats combat as a problem-solving exercise rather than a test of superior attributes. The final council member, Admiral Shandar of the Ravani fleet, leaned forward with obvious interest. Her predatory features were sharp with curiosity. This philosophy could change how we train combat specialists. Most species focus on maximizing their natural advantages. Your approach suggests developing techniques to counter any possible opponent. That's exactly right, Jake said, warming to the subject. On Earth, we have hundreds of different martial arts styles because humans had to fight in many different environments against various threats. We couldn't rely on being the strongest or fastest, so we learned to be the most adaptable. General Thakmor stood and began pacing, his massive frame making the chamber floor vibrate slightly. The implications for military doctrine are staggering. Our current training assumes soldiers will face opponents with similar capabilities, but galactic conflicts involve dozens of species with completely different advantages. We would like you to demonstrate your teaching methods, Counselor Vexara said. Can you train students from other species to use these adaptive techniques? I think so, Jake replied. The principles themselves are universal. It's just a matter of showing each student how to apply them based on their own physical capabilities and likely opponents. Dr. Zilnash manipulated her tablet, bringing up training schedules and curriculum plans. We're prepared to offer you an advanced placement in our instructor development program. You would work directly with Master Thorn to develop a new cross-species combat curriculum. Jake's eyes widened. Advanced placement was usually reserved for graduate students with years of experience. I'm honored, but I'm still just a first-year student. I have a lot to learn myself. Learning and teaching often go hand in hand, Professor Kelthus observed. Your fresh perspective might be exactly what our combat programs need. We've been training warriors the same way for centuries. Perhaps it's time for innovation. Admiral Shandar projected a holographic star map showing current conflict zones across the galaxy. The Galactic Defense Corps faces increasing threats from species with unconventional fighting styles. Pirates, raiders, and rogue factions that don't follow standard military doctrine. Your adaptive approach could be crucial for training defenders who can handle any situation. What exactly would this program involve? Jake asked, still processing the magnitude of what they were offering. You would continue your regular studies, Counselor Vexara explained. But you would also assist in developing new training modules, working with faculty to create techniques that can be taught across species barriers, testing methods with volunteer students from different backgrounds. General Thackmore stopped pacing and fixed Jake with an intense stare. You would be helping to shape the next generation of galactic defenders. The responsibility is significant. Jake thought about his classmates, how they had gone from mockery to respect in a single day. He thought about Granite's surprise at being defeated by technique rather than strength. About Zix's amazement at losing to an opponent who couldn't match his speed. About the possibility of creating understanding between species that had viewed each other as inferior or superior, based on physical differences. I accept, he said firmly. But I have one condition. The council members exchanged glances. It was unprecedented for a first-year student to make demands, but Jake's unique position gave him leverage. What condition? Admiral Shandar asked. I want my study group involved. Granite, Zix, Bulro, and Kira have been learning these techniques with me. They understand their own species' perspectives in ways I never could. If we're going to develop truly universal combat methods, we need input from multiple species. Professor Kelthus's cybernetic eye whirred with approval. Collaborative development, using diverse perspectives to create more robust solutions. Your thinking continues to impress us. Agreed, Counselor Vexara said after a moment of silent communication with the other council members. Your study group will be granted research assistant status and access to advanced training facilities. Dr. Zilnash brought up a new set of documents. Your first assignment will be documenting your current techniques and creating standardized training protocols. We want to begin pilot programs within the next month. As the meeting concluded and Jake made his way back through the Academy's corridors, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had come here hoping to prove that humans belonged among galactic society's elite warriors. Instead, he had stumbled into an opportunity to help reshape how the galaxy thought about combat entirely. His tablet chimed with messages from his study group, all eager to hear about the council meeting. Jake smiled as he read their enthusiastic responses to his brief summary. Granite's message was particularly amusing. Advanced research assistants? Does this mean we get better food in the cafeteria? But beneath the humor, Jake could sense their genuine excitement. They weren't just learning new fighting techniques. They were participating in something that could change galactic military doctrine for generations. The human teen who had been mocked on his first day was now helping to lead a revolution in combat theory. Jake paused at a viewport overlooking the Academy's main training complex. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see hundreds of students from dozens of species practicing their traditional fighting styles. Soon they might all be learning techniques that emphasized adaptation over superiority, cooperation over domination. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the most powerful innovation comes not from the strongest or most advanced species, but from the one willing to learn from everyone else. 6 months later, the Academy's newest training facility buzzed with activity that would have been unimaginable when Jake first arrived. Students from dozens of species worked together in integrated groups, practicing techniques that combined elements from multiple martial traditions. The sight still amazed him every time he walked through the main hall. Jake, we need your input on the crystalline techniques, called Master Thorn from across the training floor. The cyborg instructor had become Jake's primary mentor in developing the new curriculum, and their collaboration had produced remarkable results. Jake jogged over to where a group of students was working with beings from the Crystalline Collective, a silicon-based species that had recently joined the Academy. Their translucent geometric bodies presented unique challenges for traditional combat training. "The problem is leverage points," explained Shard, one of the Crystalline students. Her voice had a musical quality that came from vibrations through her crystal matrix body. "Our structure is completely different from carbon-based life forms. Standard grappling techniques don't apply." Jake studied Shard's anatomy, his mind already working through possibilities. Over the past months, he had developed an intuitive understanding of how to analyze new species for combat applications. "Show me how your joints articulate." Shard demonstrated the unique way crystalline beings moved, their bodies shifting like living geometry. Jake nodded thoughtfully, then demonstrated a modified version of an Aikido technique that used resonance points instead of pressure points. "Try this," he said, showing how slight vibrations applied at specific frequencies could disrupt a crystalline structural integrity temporarily. "It's not about force or leverage. It's about understanding the harmonic properties of your opponent's matrix." Granite watched the demonstration with fascination. The massive Kralix had become one of Jake's most dedicated students, completely transforming his approach to combat. "6 months ago, I thought fighting was just about hitting harder than the other guy," he rumbled. "Now I understand it's about thinking better." The success of their pilot program had exceeded everyone's expectations. Students who had once been limited by their species' traditional fighting styles were now adapting techniques from across the galaxy. More importantly, they were developing respect for approaches that differed from their own. "Jake," Kira called from the advanced sparring area. "The Academy inspectors want to see our final demonstration. Are you ready?" Today marked the culmination of their experimental program. Representatives from the Galactic Defense Corps and Academy leadership had come to evaluate whether their cross-species combat methods should be implemented across all military training facilities. Jake walked to the center of the main training platform, where his original study group had assembled. Granite, Zix, Bullro, and Kira had all grown tremendously over the past months, not just in fighting ability but in their understanding of cooperation and adaptation. "Remember," Jake said quietly to his team, "this isn't about showing off. It's about demonstrating that different species can learn from each other and become stronger together." The inspection committee consisted of some of the most respected military leaders in galactic society. General Thakmor was there, along with Admiral Shandar and several other high-ranking officers from various species. Their evaluation would determine the future of integrated combat training. "Begin." "Demonstration," called Admiral Shandar from the observation platform. The team had choreographed a complex, sparring sequence that would showcase the evolution of their fighting styles. Granite went first, facing off against a holographic opponent programmed with traditional Kralix combat patterns. The old Granite would have met the hologram head-on, trading brute force for brute force. But the new Granite moved with fluid precision, using leverage and timing techniques adapted from human martial arts. He redirected the hologram's attacks, found openings that pure strength never could have created, and achieved victory through skill rather than raw power. Zix followed, demonstrating how his natural speed and camouflage abilities had been enhanced by incorporating defensive principles from other species. Instead of relying solely on hit-and-run tactics, he showed how to maintain sustained pressure while adapting to opponents who could counter his traditional advantages. Bullro's demonstration focused on how defensive specialists could become more versatile. His Taurian durability remained a key asset, but he had learned to combine it with offensive techniques that maximized his natural advantages while compensating for his limitations. Kira showcased the evolution from pure aggression to tactical thinking. Her Ravani predator instincts were still sharp, but she had learned to channel them through strategic approaches that made her far more effective against diverse opponents. Finally, Jake stepped onto the platform for his own demonstration, but instead of facing a single opponent, he had requested something more challenging. 5 holographic adversaries materialized around him, each programmed with the fighting styles of different species. "This is impossible," muttered one of the inspectors. "No single fighter can handle 5 opponents with different capabilities simultaneously." Jake smiled and settled into his fighting stance. Over the past months, he had continued to evolve his own techniques, incorporating elements he had learned from his classmates. He was no longer just using human martial arts adapted for alien opponents. He was using truly integrated galactic combat methods. The first opponent, modeled on Kralix patterns, charged with devastating force. Jake redirected the attack using Vorthon speed principles, sending the hologram into the second opponent. The collision created an opening that Jake exploited with Taurian persistence, maintaining pressure while positioning himself for the next phase. The third opponent tried to use Ravani pack tactics, but Jake had learned to think like a predator from Kira. He anticipated the attack pattern and countered with Nexus precision, striking at exactly the right moment to disrupt the hologram's coordination. The remaining two opponents attacked simultaneously, trying to overwhelm Jake with coordinated strikes. But Jake had learned something that no single species could have taught him. He combined elements from all his training into something entirely new, flowing between techniques like water taking the shape of its container. In less than 2 minutes, all 5 holographic opponents had been defeated, using an approach that incorporated wisdom from across the galaxy. The training hall fell silent, except for the hum of the station's systems. Then General Thakmore began to applaud, his massive hands creating thunderous impacts. The rest of the inspection committee joined in, along with the hundreds of students who had gathered to watch. "Remarkable," said Admiral Shandar as she approached the platform. "You've not only proven that cross-species combat training is viable, you've shown that it creates capabilities that exceed the sum of their parts." Jake bowed respectfully. "We've just shown that there's always more to learn. Every species has something valuable to contribute. When we share that knowledge instead of keeping it separate, everyone becomes stronger." Master Thorn joined the group on the platform, his cybernetic components gleaming with satisfaction. "The Academy Council has asked me to inform you that your program will be implemented across all Defense Corps training facilities. Mr. Morrison, you've been offered a position as Director of Integrated Combat Studies upon graduation." Jake looked around at his teammates, his mentors, and the diverse crowd of students who had embraced this new approach to martial training. "I'm honored," he said, "but I hope this is just the beginning. Imagine what we could accomplish if we applied these same principles to other areas. Engineering, medicine, diplomacy. What if we approached every challenge by combining the best insights from all our species?" Granite's rumbling laugh filled the hall. "6 months ago, I thought humans were primitive because they were small and weak. Now I realize you might be the most advanced species in the galaxy, not because of your technology or your strength, but because of how you think." "We all had something to learn," Jake replied, "and we all had something to teach. That's what makes us stronger together than we ever could be apart." As the demonstration concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Jake remained on the platform with his original study group. They had started as strangers from different worlds, brought together by chance in a combat class. Now they were pioneers in a new understanding of what cooperation could accomplish. The human teen who had been mocked for his primitive fighting styles had helped spark a revolution in galactic thinking, but more importantly, he had proven that differences weren't weaknesses to overcome, but strengths to celebrate and combine. In the Academy's record books, Jake Morrison would be remembered as the student who earned his metaphorical black belt in just 13 seconds. But his real achievement was much greater than that. He had helped an entire galaxy learn that true strength came not from individual superiority, but from the courage to learn from others and the wisdom to share what you knew in return.